The case we're examining today presents a set of circumstances that are geographically and logically almost impossible to reconcile. Usually, when we look at a missing persons file, we are dealing with a fairly linear progression of events. Someone leaves point A, they fail to arrive at point B, and the investigation focuses on the physical path between those 2 points. But the file on Judy Smith completely destroys that linearity.
It is a spatial paradox.
Yes, exactly. We are looking at a woman who vanished from a hotel room in the center of Philadelphia, which is a densely populated, highly monitored urban grid, and reappeared 5 months later as skeletal remains in the remote, high-altitude wilderness of the Pisgah National Forest down in North Carolina.
You have a displacement of roughly 600 miles without a single flight record, no bus ticket, and no credit card transaction to explain the movement. And significantly, you have a temporal gap of 5 months, where a woman who is officially classified as missing may have been living a completely different life, in a different state, with entirely different clothes.
Precisely. The challenge here isn't just finding out who committed the crime. It is figuring out how the victim moved through space and time without leaving a trace. So what is our mission with this exploration today? We're going to reconstruct the timeline using all the available sources, police records, forensic reports, witness statements, and family interviews. We want to understand the gap between April and September of 1997. And for you listening, we're going to present the facts impartially, exploring the various theories without endorsing any specific one so you can evaluate the evidence yourself.
The initial police reaction to this case was incredibly disjointed, largely because of the victimology. In criminology, victimology provides the roadmap. When a stable, middle-aged professional vanishes, the standard assumption is a voluntary departure or an immediate domestic incident. The idea that she would end up on a mountain in North Carolina simply does not fit any standard victim profile.
Right. And to understand why it doesn't fit, we need to construct the biography of the woman before we get into the mystery itself. Judy Smith was born Judith Eldridge in 1946. At the time of her disappearance in April 1997, she was 50 years old. She was a home care nurse based in the Boston area, specifically Newton, Massachusetts. And reading through the testimonials from her colleagues and the family she worked with, a very specific picture emerges. She wasn't just, checking boxes. She was deeply invested in the well-being of her patients.
Home care nursing is a highly specific breed of medical work. You are operating in someone else's territory, often without the immediate backup of a hospital infrastructure. It requires a high degree of autonomy and significant problem-solving capability.
That is a great point. And there is a story about how she met her husband, Jeffrey Smith, that really underscores this practical nature. They met in the mid-1980s. Jeffrey was a lawyer, and Judy was hired to care for Jeffrey's father, who had just undergone throat surgery. Jeffrey tells the story about a specific day when his father needed an IV drip.
It is a revealing anecdote regarding her resourcefulness.
It really is. They were in the bedroom, and there was no medical stand to hold the IV bag. Now, most people in that situation would call the medical supply company and wait for a delivery, or maybe try to rig something up clumsily. But Judy didn't wait. She looked at the window, took down the curtain rod, and fashioned a gravity feed holder for the IV bag right there on the spot.
It demonstrates immediate adaptability. Jeffrey Smith cited that specific moment as the point where his professional respect for her turned into personal admiration. It established the baseline dynamic of their relationship. They were both highly intelligent, practical individuals.
And they both came into the relationship with histories. Jeffrey was a divorcee with a grown daughter. Judy had been married previously. Her name was Judy Bradford during that time, and she had 2 adult children of her own. So when they married in September of 1996, it was a union of 2 established adults. By April 1997, the time of the disappearance, they had been married for just 8 months. They were still in that newlywed phase, but with the maturity of people in their 50s.
Socially and economically, they were a successful couple. Jeffrey was a lawyer representing the Northeast Pharmaceutical Conference. This was a significant organization comprising various executives and researchers. His role was legal counsel and logistical oversight, which connects directly to the reason they were in Philadelphia.
Exactly. This trip wasn't some random vacation they booked on a whim. It was a scheduled business engagement for Jeffrey, which allowed Judy to tag along for a bit of sightseeing. They planned to fly from Boston to Philadelphia on April 9th, 1997. The conference ran through the 11th. After that, the plan was to drive into New Jersey to visit friends. It was a highly structured itinerary.
The structure is important analytically because it highlights the deviation. When you have a rigid, pre-planned schedule, any break in that pattern stands out significantly.
And the first break in the pattern happened before they even left Boston. It is April 9th. They arrive at Logan International Airport. They go to the ticket counter. Jeffrey has his identification ready. Judy opens her bag and realizes she does not have her driver's license.
We need to contextualize the era here. In early 1997, the Federal Aviation Administration had recently tightened identification requirements. For decades prior, domestic air travel had been relatively casual regarding ID checks. But following the TWA Flight 800 disaster and other security concerns in the mid-90s, the FAA mandated that airlines verify the identity of every passenger against their ticket. This specific rule had been in effect for roughly 18 months.
Right, and Jeffrey later noted that Judy hadn't flown much in that 18-month window. It was likely a simple lapse in muscle memory. She just forgot the new rules. But the airline was strict. She absolutely could not board without her ID.
This forced a logistical decision. Jeffrey, acting as the legal counsel for the conference, had professional obligations he could not miss. He had to be in Philadelphia on time. Judy, however, was there strictly for leisure.
So they decided to split up. Jeffrey boarded the flight to Philadelphia. Judy returned to their home in Newton to retrieve her license and booked a later flight.
This separation is a critical detail in the timeline. In the initial phase of the investigation, this caused significant friction with law enforcement. Because they arrived on different flights, there were no independent witnesses who saw them arriving in Philadelphia together. It created a gap in the timeline that the police later exploited to question Jeffrey's narrative. They initially questioned if she had ever arrived at all.
But the hotel record shows she did. She retrieved her license, flew to Philadelphia, and arrived at the DoubleTree Hotel in Center City that evening. And she made a gesture that speaks volumes about the state of their marriage. She arrived with flowers for Jeffrey. She was apologizing for the mix-up at the airport.
That behavior is entirely inconsistent with a woman planning to leave her husband, or a woman in severe psychological distress. Bringing flowers is an act of reconnection. It suggests the relationship was functioning normally and positively.
I agree completely. Which brings us to the morning of April 10th, 1997. This is the last verified day of Judy Smith's life as a known person. Jeffrey wakes up early. He is a large man, he enjoys a good breakfast, and he heads down to the hotel buffet. He eats alone. When he returns to the room, Judy is awake. She's in the shower.
We're relying exclusively on Jeffrey's account here, but the details he provided were consistent across multiple police interrogations.
He tells her through the bathroom door that the breakfast downstairs is excellent and she should go down and get some. Judy jokes back with him. She basically jokes about just heading down to the buffet exactly as she was right out of the shower. It is a playful, comfortable comment between a husband and wife.
It indicates a relaxed environment. There is no evidence of tension, and no arguments were reported by guests in neighboring rooms.
They then discuss the logistics for the day. Jeffrey has to moderate sessions at the pharmaceutical conference. He is going to be busy all day long. Judy is in Philadelphia for the first time, and she wants to be a tourist. She plans to see the Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, and the historic sites. They agree to meet back in the hotel room at 6 p.m. to get ready for the evening cocktail reception.
This is the exact moment the timeline fractures. Jeffrey leaves the room. Judy is expected to dress, go downstairs, and explore the city. She fits the profile of a standard tourist, a middle-aged woman with a backpack, likely looking at maps, visiting high-traffic, secure areas.
The day passes for Jeffrey. He is in his meetings. 6 p.m. finally arrives. He finishes his last session and goes up to the room. He expects to find Judy there, or at least some sign that she had been there and gone back out, but the room is empty.
Initially, his reaction is not panic. It is annoyance. He assumes she simply lost track of time or perhaps misunderstood the plan and went straight down to the reception.
So Jeffrey goes to the cocktail party. He scans the room. She isn't there. He goes back up to the room. Still empty. He goes back down to the party. He repeats this loop several times. By 7 p.m., the annoyance is completely gone, replaced by genuine anxiety. And this is where Jeffrey takes an action that I think is very revealing about his state of mind. He doesn't just sit in the lobby and wait. He knows Judy planned to take the Philadelphia Flash Bus, which is a shuttle service specifically for tourists that loops around the historic sites.
Knowing the specific route she intended to take is a key variable.
Jeffrey leaves the hotel. He hails a cab. He pays the driver to drive very slowly along the entire Flash Bus route. He's physically leaning out of the window, scanning the sidewalks, desperately looking for her.
This is a highly proactive search method. If we look at this analytically from an investigative standpoint, a husband who has harmed his wife and hidden a body typically tries to create distance or feign ignorance from a stationary position. Actively hiring a third party, like the cab driver, to witness his frantic search is a high-risk strategy if he is guilty. It strongly suggests a genuine desperation to find her.
The cab search yields absolutely nothing. He returns to the hotel. He calls his stepchildren back in Boston. He tells them to go to the house and check the answering machine, hoping maybe Judy called home with a sudden change of plans. There are no messages. He calls all the area hospitals. No admissions match her description.
By midnight, the realization sets in that this is an active missing person situation.
Jeffrey goes directly to the Philadelphia police station to file a report, and he is immediately met with bureaucratic resistance. The desk officer cites a 24-hour rule, telling him he has to wait a full day before filing a missing persons report for an adult.
It is important to note the context of policing at that time. While many departments have since moved away from it, in 1997 in a high-crime urban center, police resources were strictly triaged. An adult woman missing for only 6 hours was simply not a priority compared to active violent crimes occurring in the city.
Jeffrey is told to come back the next day. He spends a completely sleepless night in the hotel room. The next morning, April 11th, he is down in the lobby, and he spots two heavy hitters who happen to be attending the same pharmaceutical conference: Philadelphia Mayor Ed Rendell and State Representative John Pertzel.
Jeffrey leverages his professional environment perfectly here. He approaches the mayor directly. He explains the situation, that his wife is missing and the police are stalling. This is a rare variable in a standard missing persons case. You do not usually see immediate, high-level political intervention.
The effect is instant. Jeffrey returns to the police station, and the tone has completely shifted. He is ushered right in. Detectives are assigned immediately. He is told that Police Commissioner Richard Neal will be personally updated on the case. However, while the resources suddenly appeared, the suspicion almost immediately fell squarely on Jeffrey.
Statistically, that is the correct investigative starting point. In the vast majority of cases where a married woman disappears, the partner is responsible. The detectives from the South Detective Division began to meticulously pick apart Jeffrey's story.
They focused heavily on the hotel room. They noted that Judy's clothes were still hanging in the closet and appeared totally unworn. To them, it looked like she had traveled in one outfit and never changed. They also found no cosmetics on the bathroom counter. To the police, this looked staged, or it suggested she never really stayed in that room at all.
But when investigators eventually interviewed Judy's daughter, she clarified that this was entirely typical behavior for her mother. Judy was not high maintenance. She traveled light, she often rewore outfits, and she didn't use many cosmetics. The police were interpreting her frugality and practicality as evidence of a staged crime scene.
The relationship between Jeffrey and the police deteriorated rapidly. They wanted him to take a polygraph test. Jeffrey refused, or rather, he placed a very specific condition on it. He told them he would only take a polygraph if it was administered directly by the FBI.
He did not trust the Philadelphia Police Department. He felt they had tunnel vision and were looking to pin it on them just to close a high-profile case quickly. He wanted federal oversight. The local police, predictably, interpreted this condition as a flat refusal and a sign of guilt.
While the investigation inside the station was stalling out, the public search was generating a ton of leads. And this brings us to the sightings. In every major case, you get noise. People want to help, or they just want to be part of the story. There were reports of a disoriented homeless woman in Penn's Landing who supposedly looked like Judy. Even her own son, who had flown down to Philly to help search, briefly thought a homeless woman was his mother from a distance. It turned out to be a tragic case of mistaken identity.
Then there was the incident at the Society Hill Hotel. Staff reported a woman who signed in under the name H.K. Rich, or Collins. She was behaving erratically, speaking in tongues, and claiming an emperor was wiring her money. While the police spent time investigating this, the behavior was so divergent from Judy Smith's psychological profile that it was eventually dismissed as a complete red herring.
But there was one cluster of sightings that carried significant weight. And it wasn't even in Philadelphia. It was across the Delaware River in Deptford Township, New Jersey.
The Deptford Mall sighting. This remains the most credible lead in the early phase of the case.
Witnesses at the Macy's department store in the Deptford Mall reported seeing a woman who matched Judy's physical description perfectly. But it wasn't just the physical description that made it credible. The witnesses, a salesperson, and a customer independently described a red backpack.
Judy Smith traveled with a very distinctive red backpack. It was her signature item.
The witnesses overheard this woman shopping. She was looking at dresses for her daughter. She made a specific remark to the clerk. She said, "My daughter never likes what I buy her." When the police relayed this to Judy's family, they were stunned. That was exactly the dynamic Judy had with her daughter. It was a private family truth that a random stranger wouldn't just guess.
That detail adds a massive layer of veracity to the sighting, but the behavior associated with it was deeply troubling. As the woman was leaving the store, witnesses say she tried to get a young female customer to leave with her, appearing to confuse the total stranger for her own daughter.
That is just heartbreaking to think about. It's just a rapid cognitive decline or some kind of fugue state. She knew she had a daughter, she knew the shopping dynamic, but she couldn't recognize that the person standing right in front of her wasn't her child. And crucially, she was completely alone.
That is the key inference for the investigation. If she was at the Deptford Mall, she likely took public transit. The New Jersey Transit bus Route 400 goes directly from Philadelphia to that area. She was shopping, she was speaking, she was not bound or gagged. It implies voluntary movement, even if her mental state was severely compromised.
There was also a sighting by a private investigator of a woman at a Wawa store in Philadelphia near Rittenhouse Square at 6 a.m. just sitting outside. But after these scattered reports in April, the trail goes completely dead, the case goes cold, April turns into May, the summer passes. Jeffrey returns to Boston, living in this agonizing state of suspended animation.
And then the timeline jumps to September 7, 1997, exactly 5 months later.
We are now 600 miles south. We are in the Pisgah National Forest in Buncombe County, North Carolina. For those who don't know the area, this is deep, dense wilderness. The terrain is incredibly steep, heavily wooded, and very rugged.
It is an area frequented by experienced hikers and hunters, but it is certainly not a place you just stumble into by accident off the highway.
Father and son are in the woods hunting for deer. Now, technically they are poaching, as it isn't actually deer season at the time. They are navigating near the Stony Fork picnic area. They come across something strange on the hillside. Initially, they see scattered bones.
Animal scavengers had disturbed the remains, which is entirely typical for a body exposed to the wilderness elements for several months. But they did find the primary site, a shallow grave where the bulk of the skeleton was located.
The local police are called in. The remains are carefully collected. Because it has been 5 months, there is no soft tissue left for visual identification. The medical examiner has to rely entirely on skeletal markers. They find a knee with severe arthritis. They find extensive, very distinctive dental work.
An emergency room physician working in Franklin, North Carolina, happened to see a brief report about the discovery in the local newspaper. He remembered a missing persons flyer he had seen months earlier. It was one of the thousands Judy Smith had distributed along the East Coast. The doctor made the connection and contacted authorities. Dental records were formally requested from Judy Smith. They were a perfect match.
The body was definitively Judy Smith. But the identification only created far more questions. The autopsy revealed the cause of death. It wasn't exposure to the elements. It wasn't a sudden heart attack on a trail.
It was homicide. The ribs showed nick marks consistent with a sharp instrument. The bra found with the remains had punctures and cuts in the fabric. She had been stabbed to death.
So we have a brutal murder. But the location and the physical evidence found at the crime scene completely contradict the narrative of a street abduction from Philadelphia. When Judy disappeared, she was wearing city clothes, suitable for a nice evening or a pharmaceutical cocktail party.
The remains found in North Carolina were not wearing city clothes. They were dressed in thermal underwear, heavy-duty jeans, and hiking boots.
Let's pause on that detail. Hiking boots.
And not just any boots. They were well worn. She was also found with a blue and black vinyl backpack. The distinctive red backpack seen at the Deptford Mall and known to her family was completely missing.
This evidence suggests a significant passage of time and a high degree of personal agency. I mean, think about it. If you are kidnapped off a street in Philadelphia, your captor does not take you to a sporting goods store to buy you thermal underwear and hiking boots before killing you in a forest.
The clothing heavily implies preparation. It implies she was alive long enough to acquire gear suited for the specific environment she was in. She was dressed for the mountains. This supports the theory that she traveled to North Carolina voluntarily and lived there for some duration before her death.
Investigators also found cash at the scene. There was $80 inside the blue backpack. Buried nearby, inside a shirt pocket, was another $87.
That is $167 in cash left with the body.
Plus her wedding ring.
Which effectively rules out robbery as the primary motive. A mugger or a thief simply does not leave cash and gold jewelry at a crime scene. This was a killing motivated by something else entirely. Anger, panic, or the specific pathology of a serial offender.
But if she traveled voluntarily, how did she do it? Jeffrey and the police combed through all of her financials. There were no ATM withdrawals, no credit card charges, no checks written, nothing.
This is the core financial paradox of the case. Jeffrey stated she left the hotel room with roughly $200 in cash. 5 months later, she's found with $167. That means in 5 entire months, she spent less than $40 of her original cash. Yet she managed to travel 600 miles, eat, sleep, and acquire a completely new wardrobe of hiking clothes. That is mathematically impossible.
Unless she wasn't the one paying.
Exactly. This strongly implies she had assistance. She was either with someone who was paying for her expenses, or she had a source of funds that was completely off the books.
This brings us to the North Carolina witnesses. Once the public identification was made, the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office began canvassing the Asheville area. And unlike the chaotic, contradictory reports in Philadelphia, the accounts here were strangely specific and highly consistent.
A retail clerk in the Asheville area came forward. She clearly remembered waiting on a woman who looked exactly like Judy. The woman was pleasant, lucid, and bought a few small items. But what she said to the clerk is the absolute smoking gun of the timeline. She told the clerk, "My husband is an attorney attending a conference in Philadelphia."
That statement is critical. It shows she was completely oriented to time and person. She knew who she was. She knew where Jeffrey was. She knew what he was doing. She wasn't an amnesiac. She wasn't claiming to be someone else. She was Judy Smith, fully aware of her reality, yet she was hundreds of miles away from it.
It suggests she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't lost in the traditional sense. She was there intentionally.
Then there are the sightings involving a vehicle. A campground owner near the discovery site reported a woman driving a gray sedan.
This is the very first time a vehicle enters the narrative.
The owner said the car was packed to the absolute roof with boxes and bags as if someone was moving or living out of it. The woman asked to rent a space just to sleep in her car. The owner refused because of campground rules, and she drove off. A deli owner in the same area also saw a woman in a gray sedan. She bought about $30 worth of sandwiches, and she bought a toy truck.
The toy truck is a baffling detail. Judy had grandchildren, but she wasn't traveling toward them. Why buy a toy truck? Was it a gift? Was it for a child she was currently with? Or was it a nonsensical purchase made by a deteriorating mind?
And whose car was it? Judy did not rent a car. No stolen car reports were ever linked to her. If she was driving a gray sedan packed with boxes, where'd the car come from? And where did the boxes come from?
The image of the car packed with boxes suggests a long-term plan. It suggests she was setting up a life or transiting to a new one. But the car has never been found or identified.
Let's discuss the suspects. For years, the shadow of suspicion hung heavily over Jeffrey Smith. But the discovery of the body in North Carolina actually provided his strongest defense.
It comes down to simple physics and geography. As we mentioned, Jeffrey was a man of significant size. He was morbidly obese with known health complications. The site where the body was found was steep and treacherous. The Buncombe County investigators walked the terrain themselves. They concluded it would have been physically impossible for Jeffrey to carry a body up that slope and dig a grave.
And he had the ironclad alibi. He was at the conference in Philadelphia. Dozens of lawyers and executives saw him moderating panels. He could not have driven 12 to 14 hours round trip to North Carolina, hiked up a mountain, buried a body, and returned to the hotel without being missed by his colleagues.
The North Carolina authorities cleared him almost immediately based on those facts. But the Philadelphia police stubbornly maintained their suspicion until Jeffrey died in 2005. They were fixated on the statistical probability of spousal homicide and simply couldn't reconcile the geographic anomaly.
If not Jeffrey, then who? The location, a national forest, points toward another very dark theory, the serial killer theory. Specifically, a man named Gary Michael Hilton.
Gary Michael Hilton is known as the National Forest serial killer. He is a predator who hunted hikers and nature lovers in the southern Appalachians. He was active in North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida.
His operational method is chillingly similar to what happened to Judy. He would befriend people on trails, overpower them, kill them, and leave them in the deep woods.
One of his confirmed victims was found not far from the exact area where Judy Smith was discovered. The condition of the body's stabbing, left in the wilderness, aligns very closely with his profile.
However, as with everything in this case, there is a problem, a timeline problem.
Gary Michael Hilton's known killing spree took place around 2007 and 2008. Judy was killed in 1997. That is a 10-year gap. Now, criminologists argue that serial killers rarely start late in life, so it is very possible Hilton was active in the 90s. But there's no physical evidence linking him to Judy. No DNA. No witness placing him anywhere near her. It remains a compelling, but ultimately unproven theory.
There was one other perspective offered by a friend of Judy's, Karen Lindicki, who was interviewed years later. She suggested that the marriage wasn't as perfect as it seemed to the outside world. She called it tenuous.
This fuels the voluntary disappearance theory, the idea that Judy felt trapped or overwhelmed and simply walked away from her life. The incident at the airport, the separation, maybe that triggered a sudden desire to escape. The hiking clothes and the cash found in her support this idea of a new life, but the ending does not.
Exactly. If you run away to start a new, peaceful life, why do you end up in a shallow grave 5 months later? And why North Carolina? Judy had absolutely no connection to Asheville. Her family insisted she had never expressed a desire to go there. She'd been to that region only twice in her entire life. Once when Jeffrey attended a weight loss clinic at Duke University, and once accompanying a patient. It wasn't a place of refuge for her.
Detective Sam Constance, the lead investigator in North Carolina, believes strongly that she came to the area voluntarily. He believes she met someone, or traveled there on her own, and then met with foul play later. He firmly rejected the idea that she was abducted from a Philadelphia street and transported against her will. The lack of struggle, the clothing change, the lucid sightings, it all points to a voluntary journey that ended in tragedy.
So we are left with a narrative that has a beginning and an end, but absolutely no middle. Judy Smith leaves a hotel in Philadelphia. She somehow travels 600 miles unseen. She acquires a new wardrobe. She is seen driving a mysterious gray sedan full of boxes. She buys a toy truck. And then she is murdered in a forest.
The questions that remain are maddeningly specific. Who was the person in the gray sedan? Who bought the hiking boots? Where is the red backpack? And most importantly, what happened in the 5 months between April and September? Where was she sleeping? Who was she talking to?
You know, the sunglasses found at the scene, expensive specie. Bill glasses did not belong to Judy. The family was adamant about that. So they belonged to someone else, someone who was standing right there when she died.
That person is the missing link. Until we know who owned the sunglasses or who drove the gray sedan, the logic of the case cannot be resolved.
It is a mystery that defies the standard rules of investigation. For you listening, think about what it means to truly know someone's capabilities. Judy Smith walked out of a hotel room and seemingly stepped through a trap door into a completely different reality.
And 20-some years later, we are still trying to find the map.
Thanks for listening.